The last thing that I want to discuss concerning the material from books 8 and 9 on Nicomachean Ethics on friendship is Aristotle's idea concerning the relationship between justice, friendship, and community. And the central text for this is Book 8, Chapter 9. That's where he goes on in most detail about this, but there are ideas related to this kind of peppered throughout the chapters on the books on friendship. Justice, friendship, and community. There are close and tight relations among those three things. And in particular, Aristotle's idea is that all three vary directly. That is to say, the closer a community is, or the more tight-knit, we'll talk about what that means in just a second, but the closer a community is, the stronger the ties of friendship are, and the more stringent the demands of justice are. And I could have put that the other way. I could have said something like, the more stringent the demands of justice are, the closer the community is, and the stronger the friendship is. Right? They're not. It's not as though community gets priority or anything like that. They all vary directly, and the I don't know, the converse, the inverse. I don't know what verse it is, but the opposite is also true. Opposite's probably what it actually is. The more remote the community, the weaker the friendship, and the less stringent are the demands of justice. And in the extreme case, Aristotle is going to say that if there is no community, there is no friendship, and there are no demands of justice. And we'll talk about what that means in just a second. So let's illustrate this with some examples. Let's try to put some, let's try to get a clear view of what's going on here. So let's start with what Aristotle thinks of as the kind of closest community. He would call that the family. Yeah, pretty commonsensical, I suppose, right? The family is the closest community of which we are a part. And so the ties of friendship, and so this might be another way in which Aristotle's usage of the word friend and friendship are different from our modern usages of the word. Yeah, we can say that, yeah, my mom is my best friend or whatever, right? And okay, but you seem to be saying, yeah, she's like a friend to me. We don't think of the mother-daughter, mother-son, father-daughter, father-son. We don't think of those relationships as kinds of friendship. We think of them kind of in their own terms, and then we might then say, oh, yeah, and also my dad, he's just a swell guy. We're really good friends or whatever, right? Kind of in addition to being my dad, he's also my friend or something like that. That's not quite how Aristotle uses the word. He thinks of the father-son relationship, the mother-son relationship. He thinks of those as kinds of friendship. Boom, period. And he thinks they are the closest kinds of friendship. They are the most kind of central and important relationships to a person. Something like that is his idea. Well, okay, so that's a close community with very strong ties of friendship. And the demands of justice are the most stringent. I'll return to that idea in a second. Let's kind of zoom out now, right? Okay, so that's one kind of community of which we're a part. But then, I don't know, the family's whatever, just sitting on their front porch or whatever, and just having a day, and their neighbor from over the way, whatever, he comes over and says, hey, how's it going? Well, they're also, this family, these people in that family are also in a community with that guy, right? That guy's a fellow citizen. So whatever, say that kind of looks like Aristotle a little bit, right? And he's staring off into space like a philosopher, I suppose, would do. Yeah. Let's say that guy down there in the family, that's Aristotle, right? We're in ancient Athens. That's why they're wearing togas. I don't think they didn't wear togas in ancient Athens. They had like big cloaks, but it doesn't matter. Aristotle there, the guy in the middle, the family, yeah, the guy, he's in community with his neighbor over there too. It's not as close a community, right? It's still pretty close. It's still a fairly, important and present community for Aristotle there as he lives his life. But the ties of friendship there are not going to be as strong. They still might be very strong, but they're not going to be as strong as the ties of friendship between, say, Aristotle and Aristotle Jr. there. Yeah. And the demands of justice are not going to be as stringent. Aristotle actually illustrates this. He gives this as an example. So he says something, and that's so. So the first thing to say is that it doesn't mean that there are, like, that, like, whatever, you can just go do unjust things to your neighbor. It doesn't matter. That's not. No, you still shouldn't do unjust things. Aristotle's idea, or at least one of them, is that the demands of justice are stronger to your family members. What does that mean? It's bad to just punch your neighbor in the face. It'd be bad for Aristotle to just go over and deck that guy in the face. Yeah? Don't do it. Don't punch your neighbors. It's worse to do that to a family member. It's bad to do it to both. You shouldn't do it to either. It's worse to do it to a family member because that community is closer and those bonds of friendship are stronger. That's what Aristotle would mean in saying that the demands of justice are more stringent the closer the community is. That's one of the things he would mean. I think another thing he would mean, and that's the kind of illustration he gives, another thing that he would mean is that there are more demands of justice the kind of closer in you get. And so Aristotle has all kinds of obligations to Aristotle Jr., right? He's got to make sure he gets fed. He's got to make sure he's got some clothes. He's got to do whatever. He's got all kinds of things he has to do. And if he doesn't do them, there's something he's treating his child unjustly. By contrast, the obligations that Aristotle has to his neighbor over there are much fewer, right? He doesn't have to make sure that guy is fed, or, well, whatever. Just he doesn't have to see to nearly as many details of that guy's life as he does to Aristotle Jr.'s life. Put it that way. Yeah, and we can keep kind of going out. So we have a fellow Athenian there. Now we have a fellow. What would Aristotle call him? Hellene. Somebody who lives in Greece. So that guy we're saying is from Sparta. So Greece wasn't a country during Aristotle's day, but they did have some sense of they had a sense of themselves as Greeks. So there was something that an Athenian shared in common with a Spartan. We were members of, they called it Hellas. And so we were fellow Hellenes, fellow Greeks, or something like that, even though that's not actually a country, but they understood themselves as being a similar kind of people or something like that. That's a much more remote community, very remote. I almost, Aristotle running around in Athens would almost never see that grumpy looking Spartan fella, right? They almost have nothing to do with each other. Really very minimal ties of anything that you might regard as friendship. Maybe some sort of very minimal utility friendship. That guy does not look particularly pleasant, does he? Very minimal utility friendship. And the demands of justice are accordingly going to be far fewer and less stringent. That doesn't mean Aristotle can just go smack that Spartan guy in the face or whatever. No, that would still be wrong, but it's way worse if Aristotle were to do that to his neighbor, and it'd be even worse were he to do that to Aristotle Jr., right? That's the idea. And we can take it to the kind of extreme case. So we have Aristotle's family, that's this very close community. Then Athens, that's his political community proper, and that's a community. And then Greece is like, yeah, kind of a community, but very loosely defined, very loose ties of friendship. During Aristotle's day, there would have been people on the other side of the world. So let's say you, stepped into a time machine pod, and it just transported you back to 370, how old is 350 BC, but it transported you back there right where you are right now. I'm assuming you're not in Greece. Say you're in the Chicago area, right? So you're back 350 BC in the Chicago area. That's you, right? Out there. And you're kind of standing in for the rest of the world. Aristotle's idea is that you out there in 350 BC Chicago land area, there is no community between you and Aristotle. There is absolutely no interaction. You don't even know each other exists. I mean, I guess you know Aristotle exists, but whatever, put that to that. There is no friendship, and accordingly, there are no demands of justice. Justice does not require that Aristotle do anything for you, nor does it require that you do anything for Aristotle. And the reason it doesn't, Aristotle would say, is because you are completely unrelated. You have absolutely no interaction. Now, you might look at this and think, well, geez, I don't know, that doesn't seem a particularly congenial picture. That seems kind of bad. Is Aristotle saying that, people on the other side of the world, just put them out of mind, doesn't matter, don't worry about them? Well, not quite. We live in a very different world than Aristotle's, obviously. And one of the main differences, at least as far as present purposes are concerned, is that the world today is just interconnected all over. People on the other side of the world are connected to us, politically, economically, socially, right? You can hop on the internet and go to, I don't know what people do today. You can go chat with people in Russia or wherever you want on the internet. Yeah. And so I think Aristotle would want to say today there is something like a global community. And so, there are demands of justice that exist between all people on the globe today, in as much as we interact at all. Think of it like this. So in the picture that I have there you are over in Chicagoland or whatever in 350 BC. But let's say Aristotle, I don't know, got on a boat, or the Greeks got on boats, and they crossed the Atlantic and they came on over and they came across you. Well, I think Aristotle's idea would be, as soon as there was any kind of interaction between two human beings, there begins really some sort of community. And so some sort of justice comes into play, some minimal kind of friendship. Something like that seems to be the idea. Okay, so we get this direct variation among these three items: justice, friendship, and community. There's one other way in which these three subjects relate to one another that Aristotle describes, and this is more pieced together from various bits of what we've read in books 8 and 9, but I think it's crucial for understanding where we're going. It's crucial. So in a previous video, I talked about how all these disparate topics are going to kind of be brought together, particularly when we turn to his discussions of the political community. But we already see it happening in the Nicomachean Ethics and these chapters on friendship. We already see the seeds planted for how that's going to work. That's what I want to turn our attention to now. The seed, I would suggest, is the fact that all three of these things, justice, friendship, and community, are centered, in some loose sense of centered, are centered on the good. They involve the good in some way. And if you recall the fact that the highest good, the human good, the best good, the chief good, whatever, the supreme good, that just is happiness. Well, you start seeing how all these four different subjects might be related, that there's going to be some sort of relationship here. Justice, friendship, and community all have something to do with some good or other. Happiness was identified as the good, as the human good. And so these things seem to be mutually informing each other, seem to be related. Let's get a little bit more specific. But like I'd indicated previously, to really flesh out all the details, we're going to have to wait till next week till we get into the politics. So I say all three are centered on the good. Well, let's run through them very quickly. Justice. How exactly was justice related to the good? Well, one of the things we saw when we were looking at this basketball team example, there it is again. How many times am I going to mention it? A lot. We're not even close to done. One of the things we saw was that the good of the community determined what the relevant merit is when it came time to distribute things to the community. That the good of the community was essential for figuring out what justice required and how we ought to distribute things. The good of the community, well, that's just like the common good. The common good was essential for figuring out what a just distribution was. Well, we get this good showing up there. Friendship. When we were looking at friendship, we saw that all friendships came to be on account of some good, on some object of love. And the best kind of friendship came to be on account of the good, which Aristotle identified with virtue, which, if you remember the discussion of the human good, virtue was related to the human good, had a very close relationship to the human good. The human good is rational activity in accordance with virtue. But we also saw when we were looking at friendship that there was a particular kind of friendship that was particularly important for politics and for political theory that Aristotle called political friendship. And he said, or his account of it, was that it consisted in agreement about the good, about what we should do, about the common good. Well, now we see both justice and friendship making reference to this thing, the common good, the good. Lastly, community. In these chapters in books 8 and 9 that we read, Aristotle kind of throws in these tangential remarks about political community. They're somewhat tangential. When we turn to the politics, that's when political community becomes the central topic. But we have these kind of tangential remarks in books 8 and 9 about community, and the political community in particular. And Aristotle thinks, and he's going to state this directly at the very beginning of the Politics, all communities exist for the sake of some good. Basketball teams exist to win games, to win basketball games in particular. Well, the political community is no exception. It exists for the sake of some good. What good? The common good. In book 8, he calls it, in the Nicomachean Ethics, he calls it the common advantage, but it's more better known as the common good, right? So the political community exists for the sake of that. So we see justice, friendship, and community all referring to this thing, the common good. They're all bound up with the common good. Well, what exactly is the common good? How exactly is that related to the human good? These are going to be the questions that we're now going to turn to, or next week we're going to turn to when we start reading the Politics.